Hi, and welcome back. Today I'm going to start reading from Magi, Alchimia. This is book one of my medieval fantasy series. Today I'm going to read chapters 1 to 5, and next time I'll read the next 5 chapters. Chapter 1. December 1228 AD, Umbria, Italy. Milo exhaled, creating his own small white cloud in the frosty air inside his monastic cell. The smell of damp stone and straw mattress was comforting in its familiarity. The monastery of San Biagio was icy in winter, and he had nothing more than a half-burned candle to read by, providing meagre light and almost no warmth. He put his hand right over its flame to warm his stiff fingers, pondering the words he just read. True, without falsehood, certain, most certain. What is above is like what is below, and what is below is like that which is above. To make the miracle of the one thing. And as all things were made from contemplation of one, so all things were born from adaptation. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. Milo could not fathom its meaning clearly at all, but felt that it contained some vital knowledge and wisdom, if only he could understand it. His heart beat faster as he read the small booklet bearing the enigmatic title, The Emerald Tablet, an ancient text on the mysterious subject of alchemy. Discovery that he'd been accessing the locked section of the monastery library would lead to terrible consequences that he did not dare contemplate. He'd borrowed one book at a time over several weeks, but recently was growing concerned after one of the monks witnessed him returning the key. The opportunity to return his current book had not presented itself. Milo's reading was interrupted by a bell, signifying the commencement of evening prayers. His heart pounded as he leapt from his bunk onto the icy stone floor, slipped on his sandals, then turned and fumbled nervously with the book, which he hid under his bunk. Milo rushed out of his cell into the adjoining corridor and broke another rule by running down its dimly lit length. His sandals slapped noisily on the stone paving as he hurried to the chapel. Milo realised this was the second time he'd been late this week, and the abbot would be very displeased. Skidding to a halt outside the door to the chapel, he took a second to calm himself, then stepped inside. Monks were arranged on both sides and candles created a warm glow. Evening prayers had already begun, and the chant of his brother monks, which normally soothed him, only heightened his anxiety. Milo's heart sank as the abbot glared at him, even while chanting his prayers. He looked intimidating in his formal Templar habit of a white surcoat with a red cross emblazoned on its front. Milo was in awe of these veterans of the Crusades, and a little afraid of them too. He quickly took up his place and joined in the chant, but was distracted by an irrational, instinctive urge to run. The monk standing beside him touched his arm in reassurance as he sensed the terror the young boy was in, even casting him a querying glance to see what was troubling him. The rhythm of the chanting and the monk's kindness eventually calmed him a little, and by prayer's end he was almost feeling normal again when the abbot gestured for him to come. Abbot Ubertino was a tall man with a strong military bearing. A veteran of several campaigns in the Holy Land, he was still, despite his age, a truly imposing man. "Late again, Milo," he uttered in an angry hiss. Milo blushed, his chin on his chest as he nodded nervously. "You're not a child. You're 15 years of age. An adult now. Can't you manage to be on time, for goodness sake?" the abbot chided angrily. "Very sorry, Abbot. It shall not happen again," he said without lifting his head. It had better not, Ubertino spat out, staring right into Milo's soul, or so it felt at the time. Now report to the hospice immediately. You've earned an extra night duty for being twice late this week. Yes, Abbot, he replied, as he gulped down a hard lump in his throat. Hurry, the abbot added curtly. Milo turned and walked quickly out of the chapel. The halls were only dimly lit by an occasional candle, but he knew the layout so well after 7 years of living there that he had no problem finding his way in the dim light. Anxiety rose within him as he remembered the book, hastily thrown under his bed. He urged himself to be calm, but felt certain that the abbot knew something. Milo opened the door of the hospice with a forced smile, and the panic seemed to fade into the background as he prepared himself for the work that he enjoyed, hoping it would provide him with some distraction. A large hall opened up before him with beds lining both sides of the room, occupied by the sick and the dying. A single candle burned on a table at the far end, and the place smelled of old straw, mattresses, body odour, and decay. Although unpleasant, it was not unfamiliar to him, and he found that he soon got used to it during a shift. It was the only hospice in the district and took care of both townsfolk as well as monks. Milo enjoyed working there and was a keen student of the healing arts. His attention was caught by an elderly monk who was waving him over. Milo nodded and moved directly towards him, but was intercepted by the monk on duty, who wished to do a brief handover before retiring. Milo indicated to the old monk that he would be there soon and made his way to the candlelit table. I thought that you were on last night, the other novice said meaningfully with a smirk. The same monk whom he'd overheard call him son of a witch a week earlier. Milo wondered what would motivate anyone to be so spiteful, but he ignored the taunt and listened to a brief account of the condition of the sick. Then he was left alone. Brother Transmundus, an elderly monk dying of an illness of the lungs, waved him over again with greater urgency now. Buonasera, brother. How are you? Milo asked as he drew alongside the bed. Shh! Listen very carefully, the old man whispered insistently. Milo leaned closer. What is it? He replied, frowning. I'm an old man, but my hearing is still good, I tell you. He paused to catch his breath. I heard something that you must heed, and quickly. The feeling of dread that had been troubling Milo earlier returned, gripping his bowels in a knot. His face betrayed his fear, and the old monk whispered, Good, you need to be afraid. He locked eyes with Milo. Your very life is in danger, boy. You must run, gasped, then coughed a few times. Milo helped him sit up and pushed the pillow behind his head. Why? He stuttered anxiously. The abbot knows, Transmundus wheezed. Knows what? Milo asked, feeling the rising panic sending his mouth instantly dry. The books, young Milo, the books. You stand accused of heresy, my boy, a serious matter. He coughed and wheezed. You must have been reading from the... He was stopped by another coughing fit. Milo finished the sentence. The forbidden... Yes, the old monk hissed. He knows and searches your room right now. You must flee, he muttered between gasping breaths. Milo's head reeled in panic. He knew in an instant what this would mean, and he grabbed the old man's hand. Are you certain? He whispered. Transmundus nodded emphatically. His shaking hand reached down beside his bed, and he took hold of his cloak. "Take this and flee." "Now?" Milo asked, not quite sure this was really happening. The old monk coughed and nodded, then squeezed Milo's hand surprisingly firmly. "Leave now and don't come back. There are a few coins in the purse in my cloak. I won't be needing either soon. Go, and Godspeed, my young friend." Then the old monk lay his head back and tried to get his breath. Milo stood and looked around the hall, then back at his old friend, who nodded towards the door. "Go now. Use the secret passageway, not the gate." He trailed off, coughing. Milo squeezed the old monk's hand and said, "I owe you my life. God be with you, my friend." Transmundus nodded, squeezed his hand back feebly, and coughed again. Milo then turned and hurried towards the door. A lump formed in his throat, and he felt overwhelmed by several emotions, but the dominant one, gripping his insides like a fist, was dread. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Milo felt his way along the wall to the kitchen and entered the room with care. His heart was still thumping wildly in his chest, and he doubted it would settle until he was free of this place. Some starlight through the windows allowed him to see a knife and some bread on the bench. He took both and continued to another door leading down to the wine cellar. Milo descended the dozen or so stairs to the cold, damp room. It was pitch dark in there and smelled of mould, cheese and earth. He made his way along one wall until he came to a shelf holding blocks of cheese. He cut off a piece and put it in his pocket, as he did not know where his next meal was coming from. After finding his way to the back of the room, Milo got down on his hands and knees and began to search by touch for the trapdoor that led to the well and the secret passage. After a few minutes of fruitless effort, Milo began to feel his panic rising again. He tried to calm himself and repeated the search, but began to doubt that he was even in the right part of the cellar. If only he had a light, he thought in vain. Milo closed his eyes and tried not to imagine the abbot already searching for him. Instead, he pictured the room in his mind's eye as he had last seen it. The trapdoor was in the back corner on the right, past the cheese racks. He crawled on his hands and knees back to the cheese rack and followed it to its end. But there he found a wooden case full of potatoes on the floor. It must be covering the trapdoor, he thought. And as carefully and quietly as he could, he gently lifted the heavy box and placed it on one side. To his great relief, the trapdoor was underneath. When he reached for the iron handle to lift it, however, the door would not budge. Sweating now, despite the cold, his shaking hands felt around the trapdoor to discover why it wouldn't open. The sound of his ragged, anxious breathing seemed quite loud to him and only made him more nervous. Milo found a heavy iron bolt and attempted to slide it back, but the mechanism had not been used in a long time and was stuck. He used the knife to scrape off rust and tried again, but still no movement. He calmed himself and thought for a moment. Then, taking a pinch of the cheese in his pocket, he smeared it over the bolt to lubricate it. Using the knife, he then levered the bolt to its vertical position and tapped it gently with the hilt of the blade until it moved. He hit it harder a second time and the bolt finally gave way. Lifting the old trapdoor caused its rusty hinges to groan loudly, and Milo was terrified that someone would hear it. It was too late to be concerned about that now, he reasoned, and descended slowly by feel, pulling the door shut behind him. He was struck by the cold, damp air and foul odour within. The centre of the passage housed a channel, which was used as a drain for the kitchen. Milo carefully felt his way down the stairs in absolute darkness. So dark, in fact, he could not see the wall right beside his face. An irrational fear of the dark and confinement arose in him and almost made him freeze with terror. But he was driven forward by an even greater fear of being captured by the abbot. It was then, unfortunately, that he remembered the legend of the well and how it was haunted by witches. This had seemed an amusing story to scare small children when he'd first heard it. Standing there in total darkness, it held a whole new terror for Milo. His mouth went dry and he could hear his heart pounding loudly over his almost feverishly ragged breathing. He had to get control of himself or he'd never make it out, he told himself. Milo recalled that there were only a few steps down to the floor of the secret passage, so he counted as he went. After 5, he felt the floor beneath his sandal, but when he pressed down on his foot, it slipped out from under him on the slimy surface of the drainage channel, causing him to fall back on the steps and hit his elbow hard on the stone. Milo stood and rubbed his arm and felt around the floor and identified where the channel was and carefully stood to one side of it. His elbow was throbbing painfully now, but he couldn't do anything about that except pray it wasn't broken. Very cautiously now he slid one foot forward, then another. Completely blind in the total darkness, Milo edged his way along the right side of the channel that ran down the centre of the passage. From memory it ran straight for a dozen or so paces to a door where it exited in a concealed part of the wall. With painfully slow steps he inched forward. Memory of this place was not clear, and it was almost impossible to gauge his progress in the total darkness. When Milo estimated that he'd travelled far enough to be at the end, doubts gathered in his mind. Was he even in the right place? Quite unexpectedly, his outstretched hand struck a wall in front. His first thought was that he had reached a dead end. Milo's hands nervously searched a wall. With palpable relief, he discovered the doorway, which was also bolted from the inside. He hit the bolt a couple of times with the knife's handle to free it, and the door opened stiffly, allowing starlight in. Fresh, cold air filled his nostrils. It was the smell of freedom, and he took a great lungful as he stepped through, pulling the door closed behind him. Milo took a moment to check where he was. The wall of the monastery rose high behind him, and below was a winding path through the forest and caves that was said to be a favourite haunt of the witches. Hugging the wall, he picked his way, grateful for the pale starlight. The air was icy cold, and he knew that there would be frost on the ground soon. He needed to be wary of his footing. Milo paused briefly and looked back. The monastery formed a dark shape against the night sky, which was alive with stars that burned brightly in the freezing air. He felt a great sense of relief at being outside at last, and began to feel some hope that he might get away. First, though, he needed to take the path through the caves to the road, and his terror of witches had become very real. He gripped the knife and, quietly as he could, began his descent of the haunted path. It was narrow and snaked through the trees like a river. All was still, no animal calls or bird song, just the sound of the wind in the trees. When he came to the first cave, he stopped and said a prayer of protection and crossed himself, then cautiously stepped inside. The cave was short, and he could see the opposite opening defined by pale starlight. Once inside, he was almost overpowered by the stench of bat guano, and he could hear some restless stirrings of the creatures near the roof. He imagined all kinds of horrors lurking in the dark and passed through as quickly as he could. He ran the last few steps out into the open, then spun round to check if he was being followed. Milo proceeded nervously down the path to the next cave. The ground was uneven, and he tripped a few times. He could not afford to be injured, he reasoned, and he slowed his pace a little. Reaching the next cave, his fear had grown to overwhelm him, and he sprinted through its pitch-dark interior in terror. Once out in the open again, he continued to run, not caring if he fell. He just wanted to be free of this evil place. Without warning, he suddenly burst out of the trees and onto the road, where he stopped, gasping to catch his breath. Milo was extremely relieved to have made it out safely. Perhaps the witches were busy elsewhere tonight, he thought. It was around midnight, he guessed. He did not expect to see anyone on the road, but now that he was here, he had a decision to make. Milo realised with alarm that he had no plan at all. Instinctively, he decided to head for Gubbio, the town of his mother. Perhaps his uncle still lived there. He turned right and prayed fervently that it was the right way to Gubbio. He then proceeded to walk at a fast pace down the road, ears straining for the sound of pursuit. Every step took him further from danger, and as he finally began to relax, he reflected on what had just occurred. His feet were almost numb from cold, but the fast pace warmed his body, and he took a piece of bread from his pocket and chewed as he made his way towards an entirely unknown and unexpected future. The sky seemed to be alive with stars. Milo could not recall such a clear and bright night sky. It felt to him like it was lending him encouragement, and his spirits lifted. Milo felt a kind of elation at this unexpected freedom. As the hours passed, anxiety began to worry at him again. How long could he keep walking in this freezing cold? How soon till the abbot sent a search party out after him? At that thought, he realised that he must get off the road before daylight. He paused to rest a moment and ate a little more bread. Milo tried to determine how far he'd come and what, if any, shelter was in sight. It was becoming clear that he would need rest and warmth soon. Up ahead on the left was a dark silhouette of a cottage, probably a farm, he thought. As Milo neared the property gate, he could see that the dwelling was set back from the road, and there was another, smaller building nearer to the gate. Milo hoped it was a barn where he could escape the icy wind and get some rest. He climbed the gate rather than risk a noisy hinge, and then stepped quietly towards the building. On reaching the wall, the smell of animal dung provided a clue, and he knew it was a barn before even opening the door. Once inside, he could hear the restless movement of the cows that stirred upon his entry. A horse became restless and stomped and snorted. Milo spoke soothingly, and it calmed down. The air was much warmer inside, and despite smelling strongly of manure and urine, it was preferable to the icy wind outside. It could be worse, he thought, as he gently lay down in the hay beside a cow and nestled in for some warmth. Milo winced painfully as he put weight on his injured elbow. He felt inside his habit and could tell it was swollen, but it didn't seem to be broken. He rolled onto his other side and pulled the cloak tightly around him. Exhausted, Milo fell irresistibly into a deep but troubled sleep. Chapter 3. Milo's eyes snapped open at a sudden sound, and he jumped to his feet, still half asleep. In the dim morning light, he heard a muffled scream, and there before him stood a frightened young woman, hand over her mouth, eyes wide. She was about 14 years old and wore her thick black hair tied back under a simple scarf. She wore a very old and patched grey cloak, and under that a simple brown peasant dress with a belt around the waist. Her eyes were dark and very wide with fright. Milo was fearful she'd raise the alarm, and he motioned her to silence with a finger raised to his lips, then spread his hands wide in the universal sign that indicates no harm. Slowly her hand lowered from her mouth and she stared openly at him. "I scared you," he said quietly, his own voice surprisingly dry and croaky. "I'm Milo," he smiled and bowed. He had no idea what to say or do. He had met very few women in the last 7 years of monastic life. The girl eventually smiled when she realised he was just a boy, not much older than herself, and he appeared unarmed and friendly. She placed her hands on her hips, smiled and said, "Buongiorno. I'm Isabella. Why is a monk sleeping in our barn?" "To be honest, I ran away in the middle of the night. I'm in some trouble back at the monastery and cannot go back," he replied bluntly. She looked surprised. "You haven't murdered anyone, I hope?" "Haha, no, nothing like that. I just read some things I wasn't supposed to read, and now they wish to punish me." His eyebrows raised briefly. "You can read?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, I learned at the monastery," he replied simply. She looked impressed. "You must be clever. Why would you be punished for reading books?" "Certain books in the library are forbidden," he said with his hands raised. "That seems strange. Why keep them in the first place?" she asked, frowning slightly. "San Biagio is a Templar monastery. They brought many books back with them from the Crusades, precious books containing much knowledge, but the abbot fears that some are not good for our souls, and so he locked them away." "Sounds like madness to me that you want to keep the knowledge but hide the books," she said, raising her eyebrows. Milo laughed and shrugged. "It's the way it is with the abbot." He paused, then suddenly added, "You will not tell anyone you saw me, will you?" Milo asked anxiously. She smiled and said, "No, you seem harmless enough. I'm not afraid of you. But I'll only keep my silence if you help me milk the cows," she added with a carefree laugh. Milo was spellbound. He'd never seen such a wondrous thing. A happy, wonderful, strong and beautiful girl. He felt a little giddy and put it down to his poor night's sleep. Unexpectedly, he was visited by a memory of his mother's kind smile, and instantly a lump rose in his throat. He'd not thought of her in years, and bit down the rising emotion with an audible gulp. It was a wonder to him, though, the power of the feelings he was experiencing. Suddenly, the fear of the escape, anxiety about where to go next, and the sudden memory of his mother all threatened to overwhelm him. As Isabella picked up her bucket, she noticed that something had changed in Milo. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Milo just pressed his lips together and began to shake uncontrollably as tears flowed freely down his cheeks. He was surprised but powerless to stop it. She stepped forward and very naturally put her arms around him and held him, just like his mother had so long ago. Then the dam burst. Tears streamed down his cheeks and sobs racked his body. "Why are you crying? Aren't you happy to have escaped the monastery?" she asked, trying to sound cheerful. But he was unable to answer her, not only due to the sobbing, but he honestly didn't know why he cried. It overwhelmed him, and a human touch, which he'd not experienced in many years, stirred long-forgotten feelings. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, his tears dried up, and he got a hold of himself again. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I did that," he muttered through sniffling breaths. His head hung down in shame at losing control with a stranger the way he had. "That's all right. I understand. You must have been through a lot," she said in a kind way. He gave a feeble smile in response. Then she held up the bucket. "Come, we have 2 cows to milk." Milo smiled and wiped his face and nose and then followed her as She pulled up a short wooden stool and placed the bucket under the cow's udder. "You can milk, can't you?" she asked, looking up at him. "Yes, of course," he replied confidently. "I had work to do on the monastery farm." Isabella stood, offered him the stool and said with a smile, "You first." Milo grinned as he sat down. Girls were so different, he thought. He asked if there was water to wash the udder, but she looked a little defiantly at him and said, "We don't do anything fancy like that here. I just milk them as they stand," she replied, hands on her hips. He shrugged and began squeezing 2 teats top to bottom, working the milk down until it squirted into the bucket. Isabella sat and watched him, giggling at first. She thought it so strange to see a monk milking a cow in her barn. As the jets of milk began to pool in the bucket, its smell reached his nose and he realised he was hungry. "I have some cheese and bread if you would like to share it with me," he offered with a smile. She nodded and answered with a simple "Grazie." When he finished, Isabella nodded with approval. Then she took the stool and started on the other cow. Milo took out the cheese and bread. There was not a lot, but it was something he could offer in gratitude for her kindness. He noticed that she was clearly skilled at milking, and he could see how strong her hands were from the regular work. "You're quick," he said with a grin. "What? Surprised a girl can milk a cow?" She raised an eyebrow. "No, not at all. Just admiring how skilled you are." I'm going to have to move. Raining. "Not at all. Just admiring how skilled you are," he blushed. "I've done it since I can remember," she said, smiling, then wiped her hands on her apron and put the stool down for them to use as a table and sat cross-legged on the straw. Milo sat opposite, placing the humble offerings on the stool alongside with the knife. "You first," he said, gesturing towards the food. She took the knife and carefully cut the cheese into small pieces and then tore up the bread into smaller chunks. "Buon appetito," she said as she began to eat. "Very good cheese," she exclaimed, with her mouth full. He nodded and boasted, "Our brother cook makes the best cheese in Umbria." She laughed and said, "You'll have to stop calling them your brothers now. You don't live there anymore." "No," he replied a little sadly. Her comment brought his mind back to the reality of his situation. He was still very much in danger, and now he had nowhere to call home. "Come," she said, sensing his sadness. "Let's eat this fine cheese, and then you shall meet my father. He's a kind and smart man. He'll know what to do." She smiled at him with genuine warmth, and he felt like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. He'd never known anyone like her, and relaxed as they finished their small meal, washed down with fresh, warm milk. "Let's go to my father," Isabella suggested as she stood. "But please speak softly, as he's not well." Milo smiled nervously and followed. He felt he could trust her without doubt, but he was uncertain if meeting her father was such a good idea. Chapter 4. "Just wait here," Isabella said. "I'll go and speak to father first. I don't wish to surprise him at the moment." Milo nodded and smiled nervously. Then he turned and paced around in a small circle to calm his anxiety. Isabella was an honest girl, and understanding too. But what if her father wants to inform the abbot that he's here? It would be a disaster. Perhaps he should just run now, he thought. However, before he could explore that idea any further, she returned, wearing a brilliant smile, and motioned for him to enter. It was quite dim inside the simple dwelling, with only one window shutter open on this cold morning. It was an old house with stone walls and hard-packed earthen floor, and a thatched roof. There was a closed door leading to a second room off to the left. The hearth lay at the other end of the cottage, glowing red with smoky embers. A simple kitchen bench that doubled as a table sat in one corner. The father lay on the bed in the opposite corner of the room and struggled to sit up as Milo entered. "Buongiorno, Milo," he said with warmth. "Call me Matteo." Despite his smile, it was obvious to Milo that Matteo was a sick man. His face was pale and coated with a sheen of sweat, indicating a fever. "Buongiorno, sir," Milo replied, sounding a little nervous. He smiled and rocked awkwardly on his feet, looking to Isabella for help. She just smiled encouragement towards the shy boy. "A runaway monk, my daughter tells me, hey?" Matteo said. Then he laughed, which caused a coughing fit. Milo smiled sheepishly and nodded. "You sound unwell." "I don't know. Must be a bad humour or something," he replied, wheezing. "He has a terrible fever, Milo. Is there anything you can do for him?" Isabella implored. Milo pressed his lips together as he pondered. "Do you have any herbs in your garden?" "Yes, but only a few as it's winter. Come, I'll show you." Her father coughed again, then lay back on the pillow and closed his eyes. Milo was anxious to help, but Matteo looked very ill indeed. He followed Isabella outside and she took him to a small walled enclosure that provided a protected place to grow some meagre winter herbs. Isabella had already watered the plants that morning to wash off the frost, and the earth smelt fresh and clean. Morning sunlight sparkled off water droplets suspended on small leaves. The whole scene appeared commonplace and peaceful, Milo thought. Despite his age, he had an excellent knowledge of herbs, gained not only from his experience in the hospice, but also gleaned from his reading. He even remembered some of the herbs his mother had taught him when he was still quite young. She'd been a healer and midwife and helped the people of the town, but this had only served to raise suspicion among some of the ignorant townsfolk who claimed that she was a witch. It was an unwelcome memory, and he took a deep breath to try and focus again on Matteo's needs. "Ah, you have oregano and fennel. Very good," he said, plucking a handful of leaves from both. "Any garlic?" "Yes, inside," she replied. "Good. Let's get some water boiling and I'll make him a tea that will hopefully break his fever. Then I think some clear soup and a little bread would be good later today." She smiled brightly, happy to be receiving such expert help for her father. "You are indeed an answer to my prayers," she said as they made their way back inside. Isabella put some more wood on the fire and Milo opened one of the window shutters. "Fresh, clean air is important," he said authoritatively. Isabella hung a pot of water over the fire while Milo searched the kitchen table for a chopping board and a bowl. He took his knife and began cutting the herbs and garlic and placed them in a mortar and pestle and skillfully ground the three ingredients into a paste. Isabella watched with interest as he then ladled some hot water into the bowl and stirred the mixture. "I don't suppose you have any honey?" he asked hopefully. "A little, for special occasions," she replied, and pulled down a small pot from the shelf. A spoonful was added to the mixture and stirred in. "It's done," he said, and took the bowl to her father. "Please sit up for a moment, sir, and drink this," he asked politely. Matteo sat up and sipped from the bowl, making a cringing face at the strong taste and heat, but did not hesitate to drink it all down slowly. "Do you have any clean rags?" he asked Isabella. She nodded and went to find them while Milo took the bucket, which still contained some cold water, and placed it beside the bed. When she returned with some rags, he dropped them into the bucket. "We need to help cool him down a little, like this," he said, and wrung a wet rag and placed it gently on her father's forehead. "Keep changing rags as soon as they become warm. The cold water will help bring down his fever." Isabella smiled and stroked her father's head. "You know a lot about this, Milo." "I worked in the hospice at San Biagio," he replied, still finding it hard to believe he was talking about a part of his life that he was now leaving behind forever. Matteo gave a satisfied sigh and said, "You know, that feels so much better already." And he closed his eyes. "That's good to know," Milo replied. "Now sleep if you can. It'll help you heal." Isabella touched his arm and said, "Grazie." Milo smiled shyly and looked away. He did not know how to react to her kindness, so he stood and walked to the door and breathed in the fresh, cold air. Now that he had a moment to think, he immediately wondered, what now? With no experience of this kind of situation to guide him, he was completely at a loss as to his next course of action. As if reading his thoughts, Isabella said, "Milo, you're welcome to stay here until you know what to do. I could also really do with some help taking care of Father and the farm, if you would be so kind. When he's feeling better, Father will know what to do." This unexpected offer lifted his spirits and put his mind at ease. It would give him time to think, and maybe Matteo could help him forge a plan, he hoped. "Grazie, Isabella. I would like that very much," he said, and smiled. Her father appeared to be sleeping now. Milo returned to his side, placed his hand on Matteo's head and checked his fever. Then he indicated she should stop applying the cold compresses. "Let him sleep now," he said quietly. Intuitively, with his hand still on the man's forehead, he said a heartfelt prayer, asking for Matteo's swift recovery. As he focused on this prayer, his hand grew warm, and there was a tingling sensation in the palm. He thought little of it and put the sensations down to his weariness. Then he and Isabella stepped out to enjoy the pale winter sunshine. All was quiet until, dimly at first, they could hear the sound of horses approaching at a gallop from the direction of the monastery. Chapter 5. "Quickly, hide in my room, Milo," Isabella cried. The abrupt shift from calm to urgency made Milo's head swim, and he almost tumbled over his own feet as Isabella pushed him back through the door violently. She ran to the door of her own room and yanked it open. "Quick, under the bed." As Milo slid under the bed in terror, Isabella stuffed some bedding that was on the floor in behind him to hide him from view. The space was extremely tight, and it was awkward even to bring a hand to his face to clear away the straw from the mattress above. It was so confined that he fought just to keep his panic at bay. He heard Isabella waking her father and swiftly telling him what was happening. Then he heard her go outside again. Milo lay there listening, but after that only heard muffled voices. Isabella stepped as calmly as she could through the doorway and began to look busy in the garden as the two horsemen arrived at their gate. They were obviously monks from San Biagio, but they wore the white habit with the rest of the Templars. They were armed. The sight of them instilled fear immediately, but she was determined to appear calm. "Buongiorno," she called to them and smiled sweetly. "How can I help you, good monks?" The older of the two spoke, while the other scanned the property. "Buongiorno, miss. We're looking for a monk who perhaps passed this way. His name is Brother Milo. We hold concerns for his safety and hope to return him to the monastery where he can be treated." Isabella was impressed at the monk's ability to lie. He was clearly very skilled at it. She stood and wiped the dirt off her hands. "No, haven't seen anyone else pass this way yet today. You're the first. Is he in trouble or something?" "No, nothing serious. It's a delicate matter. He's a little..." He made a gesture with his hand near his head that was commonly understood to mean madness. "Oh dear, that's terrible. I do hope you find him. He sounds dangerous," she replied, feigning a worried expression. The younger monk leaned forward and said something to his superior, and both nodded. "We'd like to take a look around if that's okay. He may have slipped into your farm and be hiding without your knowledge," he said, as if offering to save them from this peril. Isabella heard a shuffling sound behind her and turned to find her father standing at the doorway to their cottage. He had a rug around his shoulders and leaned heavily against the doorway for support. His face in the sunlight looked pale. The two men stiffened at his appearance, and the older monk greeted him politely. "Buongiorno, good sir. You look poorly. Are you unwell?" Matteo nodded and said in a gravelly voice, "Yes, good sirs, I am with a terrible fever. I implore you, do not come close if you value your health." The monks exchanged a brief glance. Then the spokesman said, "Then it's fortunate that we've come by, as we're both healers at the hospice and are familiar with the treatment of fevers like yours. Perhaps we can be of assistance." "Gratitude, good brothers, for your kind offer. However, my daughter has been tending to my needs and has just now prepared me a herbal remedy that should see me well very soon." "She seems rather young to have such healing skills," the second monk commented. "It's true, but she inherited the gift from her dear mother. God rest her soul," Matteo replied, warming up to his story now. "Be not concerned for my well-being, good sirs. I am in capable hands. We will indeed be watchful for this monk you seek. It's of concern to have a madman on the loose. I do hope you find him soon. I will feel the safer for it," he said, finishing with a forced coughing fit and spitting loudly into the garden. The older monk raised a hand in blessing and seemed to come to a decision. The other turned his mount around in a circle as it became restless. "Well, may you have a swift recovery, sir, and please report anyone suspicious. You will be well rewarded. Good day to you both." The monks expertly turned their horses and made off down the road at a swift canter. Matteo stood still listening as the sound of their hooves grew softer until they could no longer be heard. They're veteran crusaders for certain. These are not just humble monks, they're soldiers. "Why send two armed veterans after a mere boy?" he commented to his daughter. She nodded with eyes raised. "Poor Milo," she said. After they had re-entered the house, Isabella opened her bedroom door and said with relief, "They've gone. You can come out now." Her hands shook and her heart pounded as the delayed effects of the fright began to overtake her. She bent over to remove the bedding she'd stuffed in behind him. Milo was surprised by how pale she appeared when he emerged from his hiding spot. Isabella pulled straw from his black curls, which grew around his shaved, tonsured scalp, and she laughed nervously. Matteo laughed too and said, "So you're a mad monk, hey, Milo?" "Is that what they said?" Milo asked, looking annoyed. "It doesn't surprise me that they lie." "You're going to need a haircut and a change of clothes, my young friend," Matteo said, sounding stronger. Milo looked down at his habit and frowned. "We will shave your head completely," Isabella added with a giggle. Milo ran his hand over his scalp, making an unhappy face. Isabella and her father laughed, and the tension of the last few minutes dissipated. Matteo said, "What did you give me in that drink, son? I feel remarkably well." "Just a simple herbal remedy," Milo replied, shrugging. "It should ease the fever." "Well, you have a gift, no doubt about it," Matteo said, beaming. "Let's get you out of that habit and into some peasant clothes." Matteo then said to his daughter, "Do you know, I'm feeling a fierce hunger. Can we have some breakfast, my dear?" She smiled to see his health returning and left to prepare breakfast. Matteo beckoned for Milo to follow, and he knelt beside a wooden chest that revealed some old clothing and bedding, folded neatly inside. After rifling through it for a moment, he withdrew a well-worn shirt and pants. "This will make a fine start. Change into these, lad." Milo returned, holding the loose pants up with one hand. The shirt, also too large, hung from his slim frame like a sack. Isabella covered her mouth with her hand to stop from laughing out loud, earning a scowl from Milo. Matteo rubbed his unshaven chin thoughtfully, then dug in the chest again, this time removing an old leather belt covered in grey mould. He took one of the damp cloths used earlier and wiped off the mould. "There, that should hold your pants up," he chuckled. Isabella giggled again as she prepared their breakfast of peas porridge over the fire and then cut some freshly picked oranges on a plate. When she'd finished, Isabella went to her room and picked up the monk's habit and cloak from the floor and held them up against herself. "How would I look as a monk?" she asked, chuckling. Then an idea came to her. "I know what I shall do with this," she exclaimed, holding the old monk's cloak. "I'll make a new dress to wear to town. This cloak is made of the finest white wool." Milo smiled at her obvious joy at such a simple treasure as this. As fine as this cloak was, he could not be seen wearing a fine robe with Templar insignia if he wanted to avoid scrutiny. "Oh, look, there's a small purse in here," she announced, surprised. Holding it up, she shook it, causing the coins inside to jingle. "I forgot about that," Milo replied. "An old monk who warned me about the abbot gave me his cloak and purse and urged me to flee." "That's a true friend," Matteo said, looking at him earnestly. "So not everyone there is out to get you," he added. "Sadly, he's dying in the hospice," Milo replied. He then opened the drawstring purse and tipped the coins into his palm. "It's not a treasure, but I'd like to give it to you for your kindness," he said, putting it on the table. "Many thanks. This is most kind and welcome. We have little money, as you can see." Matteo nodded in gratitude. "Here is a coat for you too, Milo. It needs a patch, but Isabella is a deft hand with a needle and thread." Milo tried on the musty-smelling coat. It too was a little large on him, but succeeded in making him appear the image of the poor farm boy. "Grazie," Milo said, and bowed his head in thanks. "You're both so kind. I don't know how to thank you." "You've already done more than enough. Come, let's eat something. I think we should have ale too, Isabella," he added with a grin. "I feel so hungry now." Isabella placed 3 steaming bowls on the table with wooden spoons. As they ate, Matteo asked. So Milo, what is your plan, young man? Milo immediately felt his anxiety return at this pertinent question. I don't know, he replied slowly. Maybe go to Gubbio, where I think I have a relative still alive. I don't know what else I can do. Matteo smiled and said reassuringly, Never mind that right now. I think you should stay here for a few days until things quieten down. I doubt they'll return any time soon, as there is a lot of ground to search. We're at least 2 leagues from the monastery, so you're safe here for now. Besides, we could do with some help around here from a strong young man. Couldn't we, Isabella? Her face beamed as she replied happily, Yes, a very good idea, Papa. End of chapter 5. So I'm going to finish there for today, and next time I'll pick it up with chapter 6. Hope you're enjoying the story. Please feel free to leave comments, and until next time.